What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Cook Kitchen. I am the Cook Chef, and today we are cooking up the first ever Space-Time Smackdown format top 10 decks of the week. So let's get into it. So this is the first deck. It's, yes, a Pikachu EX deck, except it's Pikachu Pachirisu deck, and this deck is doing pretty good. Before we talk about this deck, let's talk about some of the older decks. So Mewtwo Gardevoir is no longer a threat in the meta. It is down to a 41% win rate and has been as low as 23% win rate in one of the larger tournaments. The Hoogland Spraggles Open went down to 23%. They are just too weak against these massive dark decks that are doing really good right now, and these seem to be maybe a little too slow to get online. And even when they do, if they do quickly, 150, as strong as that is not really super duper strong anymore, considering all the giant capes. The previous Pikachu deck, the Pikachu Zebstrika, the Gyarados decks are down in play rate but are still doing tremendously well. And so the Zebstrika, or any evolution line for that matter, is not really necessary in this deck anymore, and we'll get into that in a minute. And then the Celebi Exeggutor decks with Superior, as strong as you would think they are going into Darkrai and Weavile EX, since they're weak to Dark, they are not doing that great compared to some other versions or grass decks in the meta. The only two decks that are really still doing good from the previous format are Gyarados Greninja and Charizard EX with Moltres EX, removing the Arcanine from the deck altogether. Those two decks can still viably one-shot every single card in the game, even with giant capes. So those decks are still doing fairly well. But now let's get into the actual top 10 list, starting with this one here, the Pachirisu Pikachu deck. And so this deck is a deck that I kind of predicted would be the new version of the Pikachu deck. I wasn't sure if it would actually be good or not, but it does seem to be doing pretty well. And so I'm just going to go over some of the stats. It's only around a 1.45% play rate, but it is a 51% win rate overall and has already won a tournament with 218 people. So now, as you can see what this deck is doing, it's all basics. And this is what I said when Pachirisu EX was revealed or leaked, that the Pikachu EX decks would probably add this in and then make up the room in the deck to play items by removing evolution lines and just going straight up all basic Pokemon. And that's exactly what's going on with these decks right now. And so what they're doing, most decks are playing either 3 or 4 items. I think most commonly it's 3. This deck, however, is playing 4, and I kind of like it. Basically what you're saying is I'm always going to have a Pachirisu or a Pikachu online, because we're still playing 7 basics, and because we're playing a ton of tool cards, our Pachirisu will always be online. And then what you're also doing, because you have things like X Speed and Dawn, what you can do is you can start attacking in with either the Pikachu or the Pachirisu for 2 energies, and then X speed it out, bring in your next guy, put an energy on it, and then Dawn an energy from your previous Pokemon. And then you always have a super duper fast, aggressive, high attacker Pokemon online that with full health to keep going and just sweeping games. So this version is really, really good. I'm not really sure, and I've always said this, that I still don't think we need 2 Zapdos EX. I still think, because Gyarados is in the format and it is still doing very good. It also, I didn't put Charizard or Gyarados on the actual top 10 list, but both of those decks are still winning tournaments. Gyarados EX actually got first and second in the Ursi Day, which was 1,700 people. So that deck is still doing very, very well. So I do think that the Zapdos at 1 and then possibly an Electabuzz at 1 from Mythical Island will do very well for this deck, giving you the ability to still be able to snipe. But I do not think Zebstrikas are necessary anymore. Now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to the next deck, deck number 9. And deck number 9 is, yes, a fossil deck, and it's Bastiodon. And this card is super duper strong. Now, there are versions of this that are playing Dialga. However, they do not have a positive win rate. This one specific build with Skarmory is very underplayed, only about a 0.38% play rate overall, so the meta share is very low, but it does have a 54% win rate and is a deck you need to look out for because it's very, very good. In fact, in the Hoogland Spraggles Open, only 4 people played it, but 3 of the 4 made it to top cut, which means before they were eliminated from the tournament, they actually went a minimum of 6-1. So these decks are very, very strong. Some versions are playing Pokemon Communications in order to make sure that you get into those very specific Pokemon that you need, because Bastiodon is a fossil, but what you're doing is you're basically starting automatically with Skarmory, and then you're building up into your Bastiodon. And because you can play so many trainers, you're also playing 4 item cards so that your Skarmory is always attacking for 50 with a ton of pressure at the beginning. And then once that Bastiodon is online, it's 160 HP. And then anytime a Pokemon attacks in to your Bastiodon, if you flip a coin and if heads, they do 100 less damage. This is probably the most tanky Pokemon we have in the game. In fact, this, if you hit a heads, will not get one shot by even a Charizard who's hitting for 200 damage plus weakness. That is super duper strong. But anyways, with that being said, let's move on to deck number 8. And deck number 8 is actually another fossil deck. That's right, it's Lucario Rampardos, and this version is playing Hitmonchan. This version did really, really well. There's also another version that's playing Aerodactyl EX with Hitmonlee and Marshadow. I tend to like that one a little bit more, specifically because of the Marshadow. I don't know if I would be playing Aerodactyls in this deck. I think I would be playing pretty much this exact deck, except I would be switching Hitmonlee, the two Hitmonchan for one Hitmonlee and one Marshadow. Hitmonlee allows you just to have that sniping ability, which is still good into the Gyarados matchup, but also to pair with things like Cyrus. At the beginning of the game, you can snipe something on the bench and then viably take it out from the bench onto the active spot and then just knock it out with Rampardos. Because for Rampardos, if you don't know, it's 1 energy for 130 damage. With Lucario, it's 150. With 2 of them, it's 170. Now, if you knock a Pokemon out, Rampardos does 50 damage to itself, but if it doesn't, it's basically a free 130 attack, and then you stay at 150. So this card is super bulky and super strong. And even if it does 50 damage to itself, in the versions that are playing Marshadow, even if it gets knocked out, you most likely knocked out an EX Pokemon, which means you traded a 2-for-1, and then you're bringing in a Marshadow that can do 100 damage minimum, 120 with Lucario, and 140 with 2 Lucario. So I think this deck is definitely another deck to be looking out for. It is currently running a very low meta share. It's only 0.79%. However, it is very strong when it is being played and is running a 56% win rate. Now, of course, this is the first week. It's not even the first week. It's only been a couple of days. So we will have to see where this goes. But this deck is very, very strong. With that being said, let's get into deck number 7. And 7 is Dialga Yanmega. And Dialga Yanmega is super duper good because Dialga can ramp the metal energies onto Yanmega and Mew EX, because both of their energy requirements are colorless. So these 3 cards pair very, very well together, and you can load up multiple Pokemon in a row before you even take your Dialga out of the front and then start bringing in whoever you want. Also, Yanmega is going to be a super integral part of the meta, in my opinion, going forward for quite a bit, because it's 120 attack with weakness to Darkrai and Weavile EX, and Dark decks are the strongest decks in the game right now. Since they both have 140 HP, you will be hitting them for the exact knockout amount that you need. So Yanmega, I think, is going to be a very integral part. However, I think the next deck, and we'll get into it right away, is probably the better version in my opinion, even though this one has a 53% win rate and a 2.17% meta share. The Exeggutor Yanmega deck has a bit of a higher play rate, but a bit of a lower win rate with 52% instead of 53%. But why I think this deck is actually the better version is because you have two grass Pokemon that you're able to attack with, and because Dark is so strong and their meta share is so high, if you combine all the top Dark decks in the game right now, being able to hit for weakness is super duper strong. Exeggutor EX is already a bigger tank than Dialga EX. It can start attacking earlier with more damage, so you can put a ton of pressure, and you can also heal it with Erica. So I actually think this is the better version of the Yanmega builds, and I think this is the one you want to be playing right now because of all the Dark in the game. So this is the deck, by the way, that I said is probably replacing the Celebi decks. There are also versions of Exeggutor that are just playing 2 Exeggutor, and pretty much that's it. Sometimes they're taking in either a Mew EX or a Celebi EX, and those decks are actually doing pretty good as well, because when you get those Dark matchups, you can just run through their entire Dark Pokemon, sometimes with the Exeggutor EX, and then when you add in things like Giant Cape, making it 180 and being able to heal with potions, and Erica's and that Giant Cape keeping it up at 120, and then adding in things like Shaman, basically this Pokemon never gets knocked out. So it is sometimes really the only Pokemon you really need. In fact, in my tournament that I played this recently on the weekend in the Hoogland Spraggles Open, I lost to an Exeggutor deck that played just 2 Exeggutor and 1 Celebi. And actually, it wasn't even no Celebi at all. It was just 2 Exeggutor. That's it. 2 Exeggutor EX and 2 Execute and 1 Exeggutor from, I think it was Genetic Apex. But basically, they just ran through me. Whether they flipped tails or not, they were just doing so much damage for 1 energy against all my Dark Pokemon that it just completely threw me out of the game. But anyways, moving on to the next deck. Deck number 5, the first Dark deck I want to put onto the top 10 list is Weavile Darkrai EX. This deck has already won a minimum of 2 tournaments. It has a 52% win rate and a 5.44% meta share. And this deck is very built very well. It all synergizes together super well. And those cards are Weavile EX, Darkrai EX, Spiritomb, Cyrus, and Dawn. This 5-card package is super duper strong together for 1. If anyone doesn't know, the Nightmare Aura from the ability of Darkrai EX, every time you put a dark energy on Darkrai EX, it does 20 damage to the opponent's active Pokemon. And this in combination with something like Dawn, basically you can put the energy on Darkrai, get that free damage, use Dawn, put it onto your Weavile, and because Weavile's attack does 40 more damage, so 30 plus 40, 70 total, to any Pokemon that already has damage on it, you're doing 90 damage on the first turn of attack. 20 from your Darkrai, 30 from Weavile, plus 40 from its effect, a total of 90. And then because you're able to do so much damage early on with your Darkrai or Weavile, your opponent will most likely have to retreat some of these damaged Pokemon, which means Cyrus is super strong and also pairs super well with Spiritomb, because basically at the beginning of the game, if this is your first Pokemon and your opponent has a fully loaded board, it does 10 damage for 1 energy to each of your opponent's Pokemon, which means every Pokemon on board is currently online to get brought out by Cyrus, and so you can basically pick and choose at that point which Pokemon you want to knock out. So this deck works super duper well. It's super fast, super aggressive, and super strong. It was really strong at the very first day or 2 of Spacetime Smackdown. It has gone down quite a bit. It is suffering a little bit from the Scolipede Weezin issue, where at the beginning they were super duper strong into Mewtwo decks, but now they've kind of dropped, and also Mewtwo decks are dropping as well, and there are just better Darkrai decks. So with that being said, let's move on to deck number 4, which is a Palkia EX Greninja deck. So this deck also has won 3 tournaments, a minimum of 3 tournaments. It has a 54% win rate, a very low play rate, but it is a pretty good deck. Now, again, I think this is one of those decks that did very well at the beginning in the first 1 or 2 days, but then over the weekend, we found out that there are better Palkia EX decks, ones with Manaphy and Vaporeon, which we'll get into. But this is still a deck I think people need to watch out for. This specific deck is playing a Giratina basically to tank and then get an energy on it so it can get free retreat, because that's its ability, and then bring out the Palkia whenever you need to, or potentially the Tauros. But overall, Palkia EX and Greninja in the same deck is doing pretty well, has a very low play rate, and I think there are just better water decks. But because it has won 3 tournaments, one of them being a 216 person tournament, I do think, and a 54% win rate, it is still a pretty good deck and needs to be talked about, and definitely still consider it like a top 4 deck until we see more results come out in the future. But what I really want to talk about is the next deck, which is my favorite deck, which is the Darkrai. So number 3 is Darkrai and Greninja. So Darkrai Greninja with Druddigon. This deck basically dishes out a ton of free damage. You get 20 damage every time you put an energy on, or a dark energy on your Darkrai. So you're only playing darks. You get free damage from your Greninja being able to use this Water Shuriken. And Druddigon, of course, hits for 20 damage with Rough Skin every time something attacks into it. This deck works super duper well and is very, very strong. In fact, overall right now it has a 60% win rate. In the Ursi Day it ran, I think, like a 55%, and then in the Hooglin it ran only like a 45%, something like that. But overall, since the inception of Spacetime, it has a 60% win rate. This is actually the deck that I brought to the tournament, and I didn't fare so well, but I also was playing a different version. I was playing Rocky Helmets to try and get even more damage. I was only playing 1 Cyrus. I think 2 Cyruses should have been automatic in this deck. Most decks of these are actually playing potions, which is super versatile. You can play them on any Pokemon instead of just putting items on one specific Pokemon. And I think that was probably where those other decks fared a lot better than mine. I don't think you need the extra damage from Rocky Helmet in this deck. I think it's strong enough without it. But I will say, I do think the potions are going to leave this deck and be replaced with giant capes, at least in my opinion, because again, Yanmega being able to take out your only attacker in the deck with Darkrai, being able to hit it for 1 shot and take it out, you really need to be able to have that ability to have the extra HP and absorb that 1 shot knockout. So again, this deck is very, very strong. So let's move on to deck number 2. Yes, this is the Vaporeon build, and this is the one deck that I said when Manaphy was leaked, when all the leaks finally dropped, not just the couple of the ones we knew about, once they all dropped the leaks, I created this exact deck. I modified it myself, and I put it on my community post on YouTube. You can go check it out. It was like 4 or 5, maybe even 6 days ago at this point, at the time of recording. The day of, we heard about the drops before the sets were even released. I said this deck, this exact build actually, is going to be the new meta, and I was not wrong. Now, there is a deck that's doing a lot better than this, but this is by far the second best deck in the game right now within the first couple of days of the release in all of the tournaments that we've been looking at. So Palkia Vaporeon, a 7.42% win rate with a meta share and a 54% win rate, and has already won a minimum of 3 tournaments. And then there are also other builds that add in a 7th basic, adding in something like an Articuno EX, or sometimes even 2 Articuno EX, And the reason why people are doing this is because of Manaphy. So if you treat this deck kind of like a Pikachu EX deck where you need to make sure your bench is filled, it makes sense to play sometimes more than 6 basic Pokemon, because you need to be able to make sure that when you're ramping with Manaphy, because Manaphy for 1 energy, its Ocean Gift attack puts 1 energy from your energy zone onto 2 different Pokemon. So in order to get 2 free energy, you need to have 2 Pokemon on your bench. And this is what makes the deck super duper strong, is being able to ramp with Manaphy, as well as sometimes ramp with Misty and get a ton of free energy from both of these cards, and then be able to move them around and manipulate them as much as you want with Vaporeon. So basically on your first turn of play, you can get a Manaphy, get 2 free energy on your bench, and then on the next turn, you already have 3. You manually place 1 on Palkia, you leaf out the Manaphy, and then you put the other 3 onto your Palkia. So on your second turn of play, your Palkia is already set up with 4 energy to do 150 damage. And so this deck is super duper strong. Manaphy with a giant cape can stay on the board for multiple turns, which means you could get 4, potentially 4 to maybe even 6 energies ramped out, and combine that with Misty. Basically, before you even bring out your Pokédex, your entire game is already set up to make sure that Palkia can attack multiple times for 150 by just manipulating all those energy with your Vaporeon. This deck is uber duper strong, and there's only one deck that's actually better than this, and it's a deck that kind of came out of left field, I think, for most people, and it's the Darkrai EX and the Magnezone deck. This deck is super strong, okay? And in fact, a lot of people, and I'm just trying to scroll up to see some of my stats here, are actually saying that like this might even be tier 0 because it's so strong. Right now, an 8% meta share with a 61% win rate, okay? But 61% is like far and above all other decks. I know I just said the Darkrai Greninja deck is 60, but I do think that that win rate will decline. I don't think this win rate will, at least not significantly. In the Hoogland Spraggles Open, this deck, out of all the top cuts, had the 15 top cut decks, okay? Of the top 8, 7 of the decks were Darkrai decks. 6 of those Darkrai decks were this exact deck with either Kangaskhan or 2 Druddigon. The top 5 were all Darkrai decks, and the top 4 were all the Darkrai Magnezone decks. So this deck is super duper strong. First of all, you get to tank with your Druddigon and get all that extra free damage like you would in every other Druddigon deck, except now not only are you building up your Darkrai with dark energy and doing an additional 20 damage every time you do, which means once you get it loaded up to 3 energy, you've already done 60, and then you can attack for 80 because of its attack. But while you're doing that, you're also building up a Magnezone with free energy from your Magneton. So now you've built up 2 Pokemon at the same time while dishing out a ton of free damage from your Darkrai and a ton of free damage from your Druddigon. And then by the time you bring in any of these Pokemon, the Pokemon that you've either damaged or the multiple Pokemon that you've damaged are probably already set up to be knocked out by either one of these Pokemon. So we are only playing Dark Energy in this because, again, Magneton can ramp electric energy that you don't even play in the deck with its ability, and then you're just building up 2 Pokemon at the same time, getting a ton of free damage, and then being able to just sweep games and either one-shot Pokemon at this point because they're already so damaged from either your Darkrai or your Druddigon, or you just do 110 from your Magnezone and then 110 from your Magnezone. So this deck is super duper strong. It is by far the best deck. I'm not going to say it's tier 0, but some people might say that it's tier 0, and we might find out that it is. I honestly think people will start to build around this deck and figure out ways to beat it like every other deck so far. I think we might start seeing Yanmega because it has colorless energy requirement and fighting shells, because then both of the Pokemon in that deck, your fighting type as well as your Yanmega, will hit this deck for weakness, no matter which one you're attacking into, except for the Druddigon, of course. So I do see like future builds possibly being used like that to counter this deck specifically. And as I said, this one did super duper well in the Hoogland Spraggles event. It did very well in the Ursa Day as well. But the top cut for Ursa Day was completely different. In fact, like all the top decks were really like Charizard and Gyarados, believe it or not. And Gyarados got first and second, the old Greninja Gyarados deck. So I didn't put those decks again on this list, and it's only because I really wanted to showcase top 10 decks of the new format. And so next week what we'll do is we'll reevaluate and we'll really look at which ones have become super duper successful over time. And I'll do like a straight up, if Gyarados is still winning tournaments and Charizard is still winning tournaments, they'll be on the top 10 list officially. And what I also want to do is I just want to do 2 honorable mentions. And so the 2 honorable mentions I want to see or talk about, are Melmetal Dialga. So the Yanmega version of this deck is just doing a lot better. In fact, this version, it's overall doesn't have a 50+% win rate, but it has seen tops and it is still pretty good because it has a bunch of different options. One, it has Mew, and this person's playing Tauros. I don't think the Tauros is necessary if you're already playing Melmetal. Melmetal already does 120, just like Yanmega as well. However, it is a single prize card, and it does absorb damage a little bit better because of its ability. So if it ever does get knocked out, basically, you've only given up 1 prize card. So this deck does have certain legs to stand on, but I do think the Yanmega build is just better. And then the next one, of the honorable mention, is Infernape. This deck also does not have overall a 50+% win rate. However, it has seen tops in both the Ursa Day and the Hoogland event, I believe. I think it was both, or at least one of them, I'm not sure. But this deck is very strong. I'm sure you've seen it from content creators already being played like crazy. Basically, you ramp like crazy with your Moltres, and then you're able to use Dawn to effectively hit with Infernape 2 turns in a row possibly, and then just finish the games off. And so this is the top 10 list. I hope you liked it. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Like, subscribe, and share. And as always, keep cooking.